What's going on, guys? I hope you all are having a very happy winter into the 2017 year. It's been a whopper for Bonsai Mirai, and we're super excited to end the year in the fashion that, I think we have all along as we've been delivering knowledge on Mirai Live, recognized that we needed to go back and establish, or at least at some point take a moment to establish sort of our baseline approach to how we can go about finding a good, potential, accessible, affordable, fundamental piece of nursery stock, and how we can bring that into the studio and go through the process of analyzing it, selecting its best front, choosing an angle to design that, delineating the trunk line, establishing our branching that we're going to be designing with, and then utilizing that to create a really beautiful, wonderful beginning piece of bonsai. And so during this sort of holiday break for everyone, we wanted to really set that foundation to catapult us into 2018, which is going to be an absolutely outstanding year for Mirai Live, and we can't wait to continue to build our skills together. Let's dive into the analysis of this piece of material. Let's pull back this burlap. We're going to take you guys back into the selection process of this material, but let's just start to establish some of our fundamental pieces of understanding before we blast you out and walk you through the selection process. So in prior streams about the nursery stock and in prior Nursery Stock Series, we've gone, and I've never been able to contain myself to keep a fundamental approach to nursery stock selection. This time we kept it very simple, and this is a project I've wanted to do for a long time, to go to a nursery during the holiday season and select a run-of-the-mill standard living Christmas tree and see what we could do with a living Christmas tree, talk to you guys about how we go about selecting one tree out of 1,000 trees that look the same, breaking down that process and then bringing it into the studio and making a really good fundamental piece of bonsai with a very available piece of stock, okay? So let's just kind of follow this process very fundamentally. Now, the first step, once we've identified a good piece of stock, and we're going to walk you through that in a moment, right? But let's just get our hands dirty on the tree in the studio first. First step when we start to think about design and process, how we're going to handle this tree that we found in a nursery and we brought back to our studio, is we need to be able to select the front of the tree, okay? And our starting point for selection of the front of the tree always exists, or the first consideration is the base of the tree where it joins the soil. We're looking for that point of greatest stability where we get a nice wide base as it intersects the soil. That wide base is going to influence what we can do with the design. So when I get a piece of nursery stock, my first objective is to identify what does my base look like and how are we going to utilize that position that gives us the best base in terms of the rest of the design. So I'm going to cut away the burlap here that exists. This is a tree that was probably field grown, balled and burlapped, and then put into this container to be sold in the nursery industry. This is very, very common, particularly for the living Christmas tree industry, to have these grown in the field. They grow much faster in the field, and then they're dug, balled and burlapped, and brought to, in this instance, Portland Nursery, right? A very, very fine nursery, particularly because Portland Nursery has a really strong supportive relationship with Bonsai Society of Portland, BSOP, which Bonsai Mirai too, we love our BSOP, obviously. Okay, so I cut away that burlap, and you'll notice here that I have a lot of really kind of heavy clay field soil around the base of this tree. This is very, very standard for nursery stock that's been grown in the field, and a lot of our Christmas tree stock or some of these widely available mass-produced pieces offer tremendous potential as a bonsai, but we've got to understand how to access design, how to break down the material, select the front, and then build a concept for what we want that tree to be. So we always start with the base first as that entry point to how we're going to go about selection of the front and the beginning of this design. So I'm going to continue to pull away and tease away this soil, going down until I start to feel the base flare out and I start to feel that solid base turn into individual roots, right? And we call this area of the tree the nabari, right? Where the base flares and goes from being a solid trunk to actually separating into the different roots that are supporting the finer root mass of the tree. When we're selecting the material, we always want to be making sure that we have a flaring base, and what I thought when we selected this was that the base was very near the surface. As I get into this, I'm starting to recognize that this base is actually all the way down, almost 50% of the way down the nursery can. And this is one of the things we've got to be aware of when we're selecting material, is the fact that we may not always know exactly where our base exists, but we do our very best, right? And this is a part of the hunt. This is a part of the fun. Okay, and I'm getting down to this point where my trunk is starting to flare really, really significantly. I don't know if you guys can see all the way down in here, but you see this line where that base is flaring? That's really the beginning of my junction between the trunk and the soil, or my nabari, where the trunk is turning into those structural roots. Okay, so I'm down probably 30% of the height of this container before I get to the spread of the base of this tree. Now, I can't necessarily see the movement of the trunk. I have an idea of where the base is spreading. In order for me to be able to properly design this tree and come up with a really good concept to select the front and choose the shape that is going to be best for this piece of material, I need to be able to see all of this. So I'm going to go about taking the soil away from the edges here. I'm actually going to cut the nursery can down so that I have just a little bit of height above the soil to hold the water in the can. But I want to be able to see that base. I want to be able to see that trunk. So let's go ahead and take this down. Let's get a good visibility into the base, and we can go about choosing our front once we can see a little bit more. So what we've done is we've teased away that soil from the base. We recognize that the base and the flare, where that trunk flares and turns into more structural roots that join with the soil line, was very deep in the container. So over the time lapse, you watched me pull that soil out down to that point where I'd seen the base start to flare, trim the burlap so that it didn't get tied up in my saw. I cut down to that soil level, just above that soil level, so I have a little bit of the lip of the container to hold water as I'm watering this tree after the styling, okay? But cutting that container lip down so that I can get a very clear view. And I'm just gonna pick these branches up, and you can see now what I've uncovered. The soil line that the burlap was wrapped at was right here. This is where the field soil was that this tree was grown in. And you can see now how this trunk is flaring. Boom. And boom, this is where it's starting to join with the surface of the soil, and we could not have uncovered a more ideal situation in the base. Now, as trees grow in a standard form, this is what we would expect to find and see. We always want this. We should expect this. Sometimes this isn't exactly what we get, but if you guys make a good, solid decision about a quality piece of material, in terms of the trunk, the branching, etc., a lot of times the base is going to work out for you. If you're in a position where the tree is not wrapped up in burlap, you can do this exploration in the nursery, minus cutting the container away and removing all the soil, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to finish pruning all the burlap so that I've got a really nice soil surface area to be able to reference visually and form my concepts of design about regarding the base and then the trunk line of the tree. Okay, all right. Okay, now we've got that nice, beautiful base and that junction with the soil exposed. Let's take a solid look at this and kind of find that point where the base gives us the best flare, the most width, and the best point of stability where it grips the ground. All right, now we're in a position to finally get to select our best base, that widest point. And I'm just going to rotate the tree and take a real close look at the different points of merit. And what I'm looking for is where that base flares and gives me that widest point. Now what I notice here is I've got a very straight side of the trunk here, but I've got flare here, okay? I'm going to continue to rotate. Now what I notice here is this sort of set of roots right here creates a bit of a flare on that side, and I've got a flare here. So I'm just going to mark, just with a little indicator, this is a potential best base, okay? I'm going to keep rotating. Now here again, I see that flare kind of starts to decrease, and I get a much more narrow trunk base, so I'm going to keep rotating. Okay? And as we're rotating over here, again, we start to see that base flare. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mark here as a potential best base. And I'm going to put a B on the container in these two locations, here and here, where my base gives me the best, most widest, strongest grip with the ground, okay? That doesn't necessarily decide my front for me, okay? From this point, I've now got to start looking at the trunk line. And before we look at the trunk line and we choose the best trunk line, we need to understand a few fundamental principles about potential issues we could experience in the trunk that not only play into our selection of the best trunk line of the tree, but also even prior to this when we're selecting the material in terms of the presence of inverse taper, whorls of branches, and some of the things we need to be aware of to select and create bonsai. Take a look at this whiteboard discussion, and when we come back, we'll select the best trunk line based on all of the considerations involved. Okay, so I wanted to take a moment to clarify some of the vocab that we're utilizing in this video so that you guys understand what I'm saying and how we can keep an eye out for these things or identify them as being positive or negative to the design. And one of the big pieces that we're talking about from the material selection standpoint, as well as through the structural decision making that we're doing, is this discussion of whorls, okay? So when we talk about whorls, right, basically what we're saying is as trees grow, at any junction, a tree will oftentimes produce multiple branches in that area so that as natural selection occurs, the weaker branches are shed and the tree has a branch at that location that is actively photosynthesizing or actively using the sun to create sugars and starches, food, okay? So when we get to these areas, if we've got several branches, right, originating from one location at this whorl or at this internode, these words are the same, this internode, right? We've got to take that number of branches down to one branch at that junction and the trunk itself that's continuing to elongate, okay? If we don't, what ends up happening is as this branch swells, as this branch swells, as this branch swells, we start to get this creation of a very thick area. And this causes what we've come to know as inverse taper, where we have a very consistent thickness of the trunk there. We get to this point, and the thickness at this point is actually thicker than the trunk below it and thicker than the trunk above it, okay? And this becomes a very major flaw in terms of selection of material as well as how we start to choose our structural formation. If we see a tree that has significant inverse taper because it's got multiple branches growing out of a whorl or an internode on the trunk, that might be an indicator that that piece of material is not as valuable for us to be purchasing and trying to utilize as a bonsai, okay? Sometimes, and you'll see in the tree that we're working on now, we can cut some of those whorls or pieces of inverse taper out of the tree and get down to a trunk shape or a trunk line that does have value and does create a good structure or framework to build a bonsai on. But let's just understand this junction where multiple branches are originating from one location, we call a whorl or an internode, and at that point, because multiple branches are growing from one point and thickening at the same time, we can get excessive thickening or inverse taper developing at that internode or that whorl. So we always hear this concept of good movement being thrown around, and I throw this term around or terminology around fairly loosely of good movement, good movement, good movement, right? I want to make sure that we break down what is good movement so that you guys have something really solid to latch onto when you're looking at material or you're looking at design to select the best front from which you're going to create the tree, okay? So let's just break movement down. when we talk about movement for bonsai, we're talking about movement that gives us a very natural feel. So I'm just gonna kind of document some of these overriding ideas. We want natural movement, okay? And when we start to talk about what is natural movement lacks repetition, natural movement lacks a pattern, okay? Because when we get repetition, when we get a pattern, for example, if we have our standard S-curve, okay? This is very repetitive. We've got the same thing happening through the movement. This starts to become very artificial looking. We would see the same thing happening with our corkscrew movement that we typically tend to see a lot in man-made bonsai or man-made nursery material, okay? This is very artificial movement. We don't want those to be what we're looking for, okay? So we want natural movement that lacks a pattern. That is great movement, okay? So when we're talking about this and we're quantifying that and we're saying what is the defining nature of good movement, we're gonna say we have three things that define good movement. Number one, different angles. At each point that we see a change of direction, we should have differing angles, differing degrees to those angles. Some sharp, some very loose. Some angles are extremely maybe curvaceous, some are angular. These differentiations are what help avoid that recreation of a pattern, okay? The second thing we're looking for is different, excuse my spelling. I'm a bonsai professional, not an English teacher. Different internode lengths, okay? Now when we talk about internode, what we're saying with an internode is the distance from one curve to another suddenly becomes an internode. And as long as these lengths are continuing to be different, continuing to change, we've got these differing angles and these differing distances or internode spaces between the angles. Now we start to avoid that repetition of pattern as well, okay? The third thing, when we're talking about natural, this is a three-dimensional art form bonsai is, right? This tree is moving front to back and side to side. We want to have different planes, okay? Different planes. So we want to have this tree moving backwards, we want to have this tree moving forwards, we want to have this tree moving to the left and to the right. And this change of direction in these different planes is what creates the three-dimensionality that is good, organic, natural movement, okay? So just to cap that back, when we talk about good movement in bonsai, we want that movement to be natural. Natural means it's not recreating a pattern and instead has different angles, different spaces or internodes between those angles, and it works in different planes, front to back, side to side, to create the three-dimensional effect that we value in bonsai. Okay, so in order to start seeing all of these components of the design, the base, the trunk, line and the movement, and any features that are adding value to this piece of material, we need to understand the cleaning process, right? And there's a cleaning process that occurs in order to allow us to view the tree. There's a further cleaning process that will occur once we've started making decisions. So the cleaning process to be able to start seeing into the tree and viewing means we're getting rid of things that we absolutely do not need, okay? So these would be interior, overly weak branches. So we're taking out these really tiny interior pieces growing off the trunk that are on the brink of death, not offering us a strong terminal bud or any kind of branching or ramification off of that piece of growth. Those would immediately come out. They're never going to be strong enough to be a substantial branch. They're not in a good position to ever be a contribution to the shape. So we'll remove those to be able to see past those and start to get some insight into baseline and features, okay? We're also going to be removing dead branches. Okay, now branches that have already perished obviously are not going to be of value to us. Maybe the remnant of that branch could be valuable to us as a potential feature, but that would have to be a very substantial branch in order to contribute to that. And there are several streams that you guys can refer to that we have where we use those branches as jin, which is the Japanese word for a dead branch, as a feature to show the remnant of what once was. That's age-adding impact. For the most part, though, when we're cleaning, dead branches are coming out. Number 3, Excuse me. Number 3, disproportional branches. Okay, so we're saying branches that are too small, which does go hand in hand with some of these interior overly weak. Branches that are too small to contribute or be a part of the structure originating from the trunk of that tree, and branches that are excessively large, that are too big to proportionally be a part of the design of that tree, are two things that we can immediately remove to help us see the base, the line, and the features and get a better idea of design, okay? So when we're starting this process and we're looking at all of these things, we select in the nursery based on the presence of that flaring base. We see that there's some movement in that trunk that we can maximize. We recognize that there's some interesting features that we could potentially utilize, and we're seeing that there's no massive major structural flaws in the form of big inverse swellings as a result of those whorls. When we get that tree home, as we're looking at it, we can be doing this first step of cleaning to start to be able to identify these other areas, okay? Now, while we're cleaning, we also have the ability to be starting to analyze and look at what exactly are we going to be doing or utilizing to create some of the fundamental pieces of design. Okay, now obviously we're looking at the trunk to find that best movement as we're cleaning and see those changes in angle, those changes of spacing, and those changes of planes to get that organic natural movement, okay? But in addition to that, we need to be looking for where in this tree does our defining branch occur from. Okay, and our defining branch is the branch that gives us the longest point away from the design to create the asymmetry that our design is going to have to give that design interest. Okay, so that defining branch is that longest branch that we're going to be using in the design. And there are no rules that that branch has to be the lowest branch or the middle branch or the highest branch. It's the longest branch that we want to focus on as our defining branch and potential component to be able to design with, okay? Number 3, we want to be looking at where is our apex, or the very top portion of our green mass, our living tree. Where is the apex of our needle mass or foliar mass going to occur from? This needs to be a branch. Technically, it should be the highest occurring structural branch originating from the trunk. Where is our apex going to occur from? Sometimes in a tree, we may choose to prune off the apex that exists to come back down to a branch that has better movement or that reduces the height of the tree and reform the apex from that branch. This is a decision that we've got to make that's going to improve the features, characteristics, or final design of the tree. So we've always got to be thinking about, where is my trunk best baseline and features? Where is that defining branch that gives us that asymmetrical flow as the longest point? And where is the apex coming from that's going to be working with this trunk, this branch, and the apex to create that design asymmetry? Okay, now that you have a much better idea of what is good movement, as well as what are some of the pitfalls or things that we need to be aware of in terms of the potential for inverse taper with those whorls of branching in our trunk, I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to clean out a few fundamental pieces that we know we're not going to need. And this is going to include branches that are dead, that don't contribute to the design, okay? Branches that are excessively weak and are not going to give us the opportunity to generate growth usable to create our bonsai. And number 3, we're going to be removing branches that are proportionally either too small in relation to the trunk, that won't be able to contribute to the design, or potentially too big in relation to the trunk where they're competing with the trunk for that scale that makes this tree look like a larger tree in miniature. Okay, so let's just dig in here for a moment. I'm going to pull my tools in and we're gonna take a look. I'm going to spread these branches for you guys and we're going to take a look, and immediately you should already be seeing some of those pieces that we're talking about in terms of really weak interior pieces growing off of the trunk. Let me just kind of open up a little window for you guys to see into. I'm going to take off the dead. I'm going to take off some of these really weak, insignificant pieces. And when we say weak, I'm looking at this piece of growth that's occurring in this very shaded portion of the trunk compared to the strong exterior pieces. And notice, needle formation is curled. It's slender. It's very sparse. Notice how strong the buds are at the tips of this very, very strong branch. Notice how weak, small, or even not really present the bud is at the tip of this weaker interior piece, okay? This is something that's probably never going to develop the kind of strength we would want to contribute to the design. When we first start cleaning out the branching to be able to see our trunk line and decide on where our best line is, we have to get rid of the dead, these weak pieces, and then the pieces that are disproportionate to the trunk, okay? So I'm just gonna go about, again, taking away some of these pieces that are disproportionate to the trunk. A piece like this coming off of the trunk, when you have a trunk of this girth, this feels very, very undersized for this trunk to be originating from the trunk as a primary piece of structure. Now, when we talk about a primary piece of structure, we're talking about these bigger, thicker branches that originate immediately from the trunk. This is a primary branch, a branch that originates from the trunk. These should be thick enough to be proportionally accurate or proportionally comparable to a branch that would originate from a trunk of this girth. So when I see these smaller, more slender pieces, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna take these off, right? And they also happen to be weaker on the interior. Some of them have some dead material on them already that we would be pruning off. And you can already see that that starts to open up our visibility of our trunk line, okay? So I'm gonna continue cleaning. Okay, so again, continuing to clean, I'm gonna be taking away some of these interior pieces that are weaker, some of these that are real slender and disproportionate to the trunk. And let me get a few more of these pieces out of the way so that you guys can have a very clear idea and understanding of my thought process in removing these pieces, okay? So now when we're looking and you guys have that real clear, transparent view, and I see I still have some small little stragglers here. Let me go ahead and take these guys off, okay? Now, just in that very simple action, you see how much more we can clearly define and delineate our trunk line. And we, again, can just kind of compare how small and slender these are to the girth of the trunk. And when we look at these other more structural branches that we've left, how much thicker these are to be proportionally creating branching that is in line and directly of the same size as the trunk of our tree. Okay, so after going through and just removing dead, really weak, or disproportionately small through the, I would say the first 2/3 of the tree, we get up to this upper portion of the tree where this tree clearly was starting to gain strength and decide, because it was growing in the field, I'm gonna be a big noble fir. I'm gonna be a big Christmas tree, right? And instead of removing branches that are disproportionately small to the trunk, if we chose to keep the upper portion of the tree, we would need to come back and be removing branches that are disproportionately large to the trunk because we have whorls. And I'm going to go ahead and show you guys, to the best of my ability, we have a whorl right here where we've got branches that are almost the same thickness as the upper leader, or this top vertically growing component of the trunk. And consequently, at this one junction, right, at this whorl, where we've got multiple branches growing here, we're getting inverse swelling here. And then I'm going to fold these branches down, okay, and I'm going to show you this node and this junction, okay, which is very long. And then we get to this where we see another whorl where we've got thickening here at the shoulders of these and a much thinner trunk below it and a much thinner trunk above it, okay? So we need to figure out how we solve this problem of these two junctions or whorls where we've got inverse taper, okay? Now, at this lower of the two, we do have the option to remove a few of these disproportionately larger branches. And I'm going to go in, because we do have a few branches that are much smaller and proportional to that location on the trunk, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take out a few of the very biggest, thickest branches just to see if we can have a little more clarity in the design, okay? So I'm going to take out the biggest, thickest ones that are competing with the trunk of the tree. Excuse me. Okay, now notice how big of a branch that was. It's the same size as this vertically growing piece. Also notice around it I've got these much smaller pieces, okay? I have another big, thick branch here that I'm going to remove. Okay, now I think what we're both going to realize in this removal process is that this inverse taper is not going to be something that we're going to be able to fix. Now we may be sitting here thinking, oh man, our tree is ruined. This is not true though. This is very common of nursery stock to have to be able or have to reconsider where our trunk movement is going to occur by some of these limitations that we encounter. And here's one of the beautiful things about this tree. If we come down here, we notice that we actually have another node farther down where we have a strong branch emerging to the right, a strong branch emerging to the left, and a slightly more proportional branch in existence at that node as well. If we think about one of these branches taking over as the line of our trunk and potentially removing this upper portion that has long internodes and significant inverse swelling, we can create movement in our trunk just by the pruning process that increases the quality of the tree, okay? So I'm going to redefine my apex or redefine my leader of the tree by pruning off the top and forming one of these two thick branches as the next upper portion or apical region of my tree. All right, the moment of truth. Okay. And all of a sudden, our tree has taken on an entirely different characteristic. Okay? Now, at this junction, again, I want to go back and just talk about the fact, and I'm going to show you there first, and then I'm going to bring it to the detail cam. Okay, I have a very thick branch here and a very thick branch here. This branch has a really nice quantity of finer branches coming off of it and gives us a wonderful piece of movement here, change in angle, right, that continues to contribute to the shape of the tree. This branch here is not nearly as good and is contributing to potentially this inverse taper that exists. Let me show you guys that in detail. Okay? Now notice this very beautiful angle of transition and the movement that we form if we choose to use this as the leader. Notice that this branch has far less girth, doesn't necessarily give us the same movement, and doesn't have that same capacity to transition the taper in the line of the trunk as this branch does. Okay? If I'm looking at these opposing each other and I want to eliminate this inverse taper, I'm going to take this off and I'm going to use this branch as my branch and this branch now as the continuation of my trunk line to form the apex of the tree. Okay? After removing those now, I've got to refine this cut area so that this will heal and won't leave a scar, and we'll see this trunk line form a very nice smooth transition from what was the original trunk now to this branch that we're redefining as the continuation of the trunk. So watch as I just kind of cut and work back the shape of these to eliminate that inverse taper. So when making these cuts, I just want to form a slight concavity into the trunk of the tree, knowing that from this exterior portion of living tissue, I'm going to get a roll or a callus of new tissue forming that's going to have a slight protrusion from this trunk. So if I cut this flush, I would actually create a bulge in the trunk line. So this tool is known as a knob cutter, and it just creates a nice slight concavity into the trunk, so that when that callus rolls or when that callus forms, that new tissue heals along the margin of this cut, it forms a nice flush surface, and we'll never see it. In 3 or 4 years when this is healed, we won't even see that there was a cut made here because it will have healed flush and our trunk will be nice and smooth. This transition will be well worked out, okay? So when we do these cuts and we open up these big wounds in our tree, there's a thing called cut paste that we have to be able to seal these wounds off so that they heal effectively. And we've got 2 different types of cut paste that we can use. We have a putty form that's almost like a sticky clay of sorts, okay? And then we have a liquid form that is, as advertised, very fluid and very liquid. Now, the liquid form of cut paste is ideal for patching small tears in the bark, maybe a small break in a finer branch, or small cut sites, okay? But when we start to look at big branch removal or transitions in taper where we've cut the whole top out of the tree, we want to be using the putty form of cut paste because the putty form of cut paste stops sap from oozing out of this trunk and allows that wound to heal, okay? So I'm going to take a blob of my putty, okay? I'm going to put that right in the center of that wound. I'm just going to give my finger a little bit of a lick so that it doesn't adhere to the putty because it is quite sticky unless your finger is moist, okay? And I'm just going to push that cut putty right out to the margin of where that cut has been created so that I create that contact and that sealant to stop sap from oozing from this wound that we've created to redefine the movement of the trunk and the transition of taper to this branch, okay? So notice how I'm not going overboard, I'm just moving it right out there. If it starts to stick to my finger, just give it a little bit of a lick so that it stops adhering. Yes, bonsai is a dirty practice. You'll probably eat a lot of things you didn't think you would eat doing bonsai. Dirt, cut paste, potentially wire. Okay, notice how clean that is, how our wound is now, the margins have been covered so that sap won't be oozing and the tree will be able to heal from that big decision that we've made. Now that we've made some of those choices, we can come back and we can, for the first time, start to look at where is the best line and movement in our trunk, okay? Now I want to refresh that we have our best flare of our base where it joins the soil right here. And then we also had that same flare present on the opposite side of the trunk right here, where we get that really nice wide base, okay? Now we want to disconnect. We know that that base exists there. We want to be looking at the line and the movement of the trunk in terms of changes of direction, angle, spaces, and also that three-dimensional plane that we discussed on the whiteboard, okay? So I'm just going to rotate, much like I did while I was looking at the base. I'm going to be rotating and I'm going to be looking for any subtle movements in the base of the tree. And this is a very common situation that we encounter with nursery material where we don't have a lot of dramatic movement, and that's okay, right? Good bonsai can be created from any piece of material if we understand the process of the selection of the front and the creation of design. And this is what we're walking through as we're working with this piece of material that's very accessible to all of us, right? A common Christmas tree found in a garden center or a nursery, okay? Now I notice as I'm rotating a few very subtle pieces of movement here. If you'll notice here, and then there's almost just a very light change of angle to give me boom, boom, right here. Just a little change of the trunk line right there, okay? That's a nice feature. This is a nice, soft, subtle feature, okay? Now, obviously, as we move up the trunk, we also have this very dramatic bend right here. Now this very dramatic bend, based on how we chose to prune out the top and transition our trunk line to this branch, maybe needs to be eased up a little bit to be able to work with this more subtle bend that occurs at the base, so we have some continuity in terms of our design. But as far as we've seen rotating the tree to this point, I'm going to say that we have a pretty darn good, and I'm going to put just an M, a little tough to see. Okay, I'm going to say we have pretty good movement in terms of the whole tree and what it's offering right here. Now this is interesting because I'm just going to rotate back and I'm going to say we have a really good base right here. We have really good movement right here. Let's continue to explore a little bit and see if we can suss out or find any more of those really finely nuanced pieces of movement, okay? Now I see something interesting from right here. Notice that we've got, again, this very subtle line coming up from the base. We have a nice little jog right here, okay? Slight angle, boom, boom, so a piece of movement right there, okay? And then we have another little kickback where we change our angle right here. So another little change of movement right there. And then we come back, boom, right here, and another little change of movement right there. So as far as we're concerned, this shows us more changes of direction from this angle. I like this. Okay, this is interesting. So I'm going to put an M here, just taking a look at this. And again, notice I've got a really good base right here. It's very interesting. Bonsai design is almost serendipitous. When we start looking at the best base, then we start looking for the best movement, and then we start looking for other interesting features of the tree. A lot of times, those pieces and components are very close together in terms of the entire composition, and a lot of times we're able to find the best of all worlds in a relatively close proximity to each other. Okay, let me continue looking. Let's make sure that we've identified the best possible regions. This is very vertical and straight here. I don't see the same quantity and caliber of changes in directions. Okay, as I'm looking here, again, I see very vertical. We come back to that point where we have that good base. Right here, we come back to that point where we have one change of direction here and we have one change up here, but that's not necessarily the best movement. We saw multiple changes in direction over here, okay? I'm going to say if we've got our best base over in here and we've got our best movement here, that this point is now going to become the front that we're going to utilize to style the tree, okay? And this is objective analysis of the tree's characteristics to give us the best possible decision in terms of where the front of our tree needs to exist. This is now the front of our tree. So now that you guys have walked through the process with us of how we look at the base of the tree, of how we look at movement, of how we analyze whorls and the potential for inverse taper, you guys have all of the tools possible to go with that knowledge to the nursery and find a good piece of material that offers you the opportunity to experiment with bonsai design, right? We're going to take you with us as we walk through Portland Nursery to select this piece of material, and we're going to show you this process that allowed us to choose this piece amongst 50 other noble fir Christmas tree nursery stock pieces and find this one to be of the highest value. And again, I want to encourage you guys to focus on these concepts that we're establishing here of searching for that base, searching for the movement, searching for and making sure we're not setting ourselves up for problems with inverse taper to be able to select a piece of material that's going to allow you guys to create a wonderful beginning piece of bonsai. Take a look, hope you enjoy, and we'll come back to see now how we take this selection of front and turn it into a beautiful shape and design. Off on the nursery hunt again. I'm super excited for this Nursery Stock Series because we're actually doing something that I've wanted to do my entire bonsai career, and I've never really had, not the motivation. I've always had the motivation, but like December is kind of one of those months where no matter how much you want to do something, it just isn't really happening. I've always wanted to go to a nursery, look at all of the very standard Christmas trees that exist that you can buy, not cut ones, but ones that have a root mass, and see what I can do with just your run-of-the-mill, standard accessible living Christmas tree. So today we're headed to Portland Nursery in Portland, Oregon. Portland Nursery is a very fine establishment. They've been very supportive of the bonsai movement in the Pacific Northwest. They're willing to let us come film in their nursery, which actually is very, very difficult to get permission to do. But this whole idea is designed to just kind of set a real foundational sort of scope of work for everybody out there who sees these trees on a yearly basis, wants to dig into bonsai, doesn't know how to get started, doesn't really know what to do with material that they see commonly available. We've had requests to do this. I've had the desire to do it. Today we're doing it. I'm pumped to dig in and super stoked that you guys are along for the ride to join us for some material selection and just the very basic nuts and bolts of creating a really, really cool beginning piece of bonsai. So we're here at Portland Nursery. We just got here. It's a cloudy, wintry day. And I'm pretty pumped because I got a little sneak peek at the Christmas trees, the living Christmas trees. I think we're gonna find something super duper killer. And the whole point today is accessible, like something everybody can find. So let's go dig in. This looks very Christmassy. Ugh. So I would say that this is pretty standard for what we're going to see in terms of material that's being marketed as sort of a living Christmas tree. Right? When we scratch this away, we notice that we've got an expanding base down towards the bottom. That's a great start to finding a good piece of material. We see that there's some very subtle movement in the trunk here, which is nice. That gives us a framework to create a nice fundamental bonsai design on. Now this is also going to be standard for what we're seeing, which is at any junction where there's branches, we're going to have multiple branches occurring from one internode. These are the areas that we're going to be doing some branch selection to be creating the best possible tree we can. Now one of the things that we want to be looking at when we're selecting material out of really fundamental nursery stock is, are any of these junctions where all of these branches are originating from? And we typically call these whorls of branches, right? Where we have this one area, a lot of multiple branches emerging from that. That's a branch whorl. Are any of these super thick in comparison to the thickness of the trunk to a point where there's a big bulge in the trunk? And from what I'm seeing here, this looks pretty darn good. There's a lot of different selections. The distance between the whorls is fairly short, so we can create a really nice, interesting tree on this very short, compact, sort of Christmas tree form. Okay, so this is a piece of material that's offering us some potential. This could be a really good selection for a living Christmas tree that we can utilize to make a good bonsai. I'm gonna leave this right here. Ooh, I see Christmas tree. Oh, here we go. Noble Christmas trees. This is kind of more what I was thinking. Just our standard form, noble Christmas trees, one of the universally accepted species that forms a Christmas tree, right? In the Pacific Northwest, extremely widely produced, exported all over the world. And when I just tilt this guy up, there's a few things that immediately stand out. This pyramidal form, perfect for the Christmas tree market and industry. When I come in here, I've got this nice subtle curve through the trunk, okay? And I'm looking and trying to see if I have some of that movement. I've got some interesting branches, and notice that they're at different junctions and internodes. This is what I'm looking for to be able to create a structure that's gonna really give us some value and interest, okay? Now, one of the big concerns that I have is, what is the quality of this base? And when they're balled and burlapped like this, the best I can do is feel to see if the base flares outwards or if it starts to curl back inwards. As long as I feel around here and I feel that base flaring outwards, which this one has a nice outward flare, this is a potential good piece of material to be creating a really nice beginning bonsai. Ooh. Ooh, take a look at this one. Now this is different than the one we just looked at because we don't have that same subtle movement and we've got a much thicker trunk. This is interesting, okay? Notice too, when we get up near the upper portion of the tree, I've got a very thick branch taking off to the left here. I've got this very thick leader there. This gives us some interest to potentially utilize this as a new trunk line and have that piece of movement built into the tree already. I see that I've got branches at different internodes. I see that I've got a lot of variety. I feel that base, I've got that outward flare. This too is a good piece of material to create a potentially interesting starter bonsai from. Okay, so we have a real subtle, soft movement here, right? We have this thicker, more upright trunk here. Both of these are really nice. Let's take a look at this one. You always know somebody who's kind of dug into searching for bonsai material because they're always on their knees getting into the nitty-gritty of the structure. All right, let's take a look at this one. Okay, so immediately right off the bat, and you don't necessarily want to form opinions super quickly, but My educated eye is telling me this is a piece of material that I would steer away from, and I want you to come in and take a look at this so that I can show you why. Okay, notice that on this junction, or this whorl, as we talked about in the other pieces, notice how there's this very, very thick swollen piece here. All the branches emerge from this. We have a thinner area here, and then we've got another big, thick, swollen whorl of branches occurring from here. Now, if we compare this to the first two pieces that we looked at where they had a lot of different branches, bigger branches emerging from different locations, and no inverse taper or no excessive swelling in the whorls, this piece of material with this swelling here, thin, this swelling here, thin, very long internode, no branches, and then another big whorl here, this is a piece of material we should steer away from. Wind causing us some problems, both in terms of the sensation in our fingertips as well as the quality of filming. We're going to persevere though, because we need ourselves a good Christmas tree bonsai. Colorado spruce, always, always a worthy consideration. Okay, now notice on the spruce how much more rugged, dark, well-formed the bark is. This is a really, really significant aspect of bonsai. The noble fir is going to take a while to bark up. It's a very smooth bark species. Colorado spruce has a lot more rugged bark, a lot older, more sort of ancient look. And this really tall tree gives us the opportunity to kind of create this big tree feel in terms of what we're going to be building. Although I like this, I want to stick more to that classic Christmas tree form. I'm gonna hold off on the Colorado spruce today, and let's keep exploring some other stuff. What do we have here? We got some form of mugo, Pinus nigra. Ooh, Austrian black pine. This one is an interesting subject for bonsai. Now, the developmental sort of process for Pinus nigra is an incredibly interesting and different than almost any other pine that we work with, the Austrian black pine. This will be a tree that we'll come back to in future streams because there's a lot of mystery around it in terms of how it's handled. But if we know how to work with it, it's one of the strongest, best species in terms of rapid development. But I do notice here we've got this very gray-blue, straight-needled with this red bud and sap emerging from the bud, very characteristic of Pinus sylvestris. And Pinus sylvestris, Glauca nana, dwarf Scotch pine, interesting potential bonsai subject. Let's take a look. So immediately upon pulling this up, you see that we've got multiple branches kind of occurring in the canopy of this tree. And a lot of us might think, oh man, no, not going to be a good bonsai. That's not necessarily true. Now, this isn't going to form your classical bonsai shape, okay? But if we just kind of clean out some of these dead needles and whatnot and pull back this burlap, notice kind of that orangey reddish color underneath the bark. We see it here too as the bark flakes off on Pinus sylvestris or the Scots pine. This is a really beautiful, this molting bark is a really beautiful characteristic. And a lot of natural trees kind of form these multiple trunks or these multiple branches that form their own spaces in bonsai design. This is definitely a piece of material that could be utilized. We're going to leave it for now because it's not giving us the opportunity to create that real fundamental shape, but something that we could definitely come back to, and a species and variety that is worthy of being considered for bonsai practice and use. Oof. Ooh, yeah. I am a sucker for cedars though. Just looking at this, it's got all kinds of interesting movement. Now, this is a specialty conifer. We know that when we start looking at specialty conifers as material, they offer some different challenges because their growth habits are less predictable. And you can see how this is kind of spiraling and the branches are already contorted. Very interesting. If we try to train this as a bonsai, not necessarily going to behave the way that we anticipate it would, or maybe the way that we would want it to. There's opportunity, there's creativity in that, and there also could be some limitation and some frustration in that. So just taking a look at what we have here, kind of coming back to, do we have a nice base on the tree, right? When I look here, I see we have a really good trunk. When I feel around for the base, I see that it continues to move considerably down below the soil line, but does flare out. We've got these interesting branches here. This could be a very, very, very cool tree. not necessarily meets our Christmas tree mold, but we'll keep this in mind. Cedrus lebani green prince. Is that right? Yeah. Interesting species, might be something to play with in the future. All right. So, having spread our wings and looked over a majority of Portland Nursery, there is a tremendous number of trees here that I would really love to play with. I want to try to be disciplined though, because bonsai is an infection and all of a sudden you end up going home with 20 trees, and that's not what we're doing today, right? I'm going to come back to the original noble firs sort of as this iconic Christmas tree species spread throughout the world, and I set these two aside. I'm going to pick the one that I think is the best, and the one that struck me the most was this thicker trunked piece that had these really interesting branches and the opportunity at the top of the tree to potentially make a cut and add some movement with this piece right here to really create an interesting, fundamental, classic bonsai form. This is the one we're going to go home with right here.
I could get your signature here.
You bet.
You're all set.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Gosh. Alrighty. Okay, so you guys took a walk through the nursery with us. We've taken this piece of material, we've identified the base, we've identified the line. These are things that we saw in the nursery that we've carried over into the selection of the front, sort of that objective approach to making the best bonsai tree we possibly can out of this piece of material. And now I just want to switch gears a little bit and get into some of the really fun stuff about design. Okay, now that doesn't necessarily mean that we take our hands off the gas of allowing the tree to dictate our decisions, but we're going to be playing with and understanding how we maximize what the tree has to offer us and utilizing that to tell the story and generate the design for us. And in doing so, every single tree that you guys touch, you're going to be taking a different approach because the material is going to be guiding your process around design. All right, so let's take a quick look at this. All right. So when we think about this trunk, right, we've worked really, really hard to maximize, to the best of our ability, the number of times that it changes direction and the movement that we have in this trunk. But we should notice that we're still standing very vertical in terms of the overall orientation. Okay? And one of the ways that we can generate more movement or create more energy or interest in the design is by adding some angle to the trunk and kind of taking the visual mass and tilting it, and then utilizing the branches to counter that to regain visual stability, okay? So first I want to try an experiment. What happens if we tilt this tree to the left? And I'm just going to use a wedge here. I'm going to tilt this to the left, okay? And let's take a really good solid look. I'm going to roll this over to the detail cam. Okay, now from the front that we've identified as being the best base and the best line, okay, when we tilt this to the left, gives us, you can already see how much more movement and energy in terms of distribution of visual weight we've achieved. But notice what we have happening here. One of these points that created that widest, strongest point in terms of that soil line and representation of that firm grip on the ground has now been pulled up into the air, and we see that when we get underneath it, it actually cuts back into the trunk and creates that inverse taper situation that we were really concerned with, okay? So when we're looking at this and we start to see that, we know that the soil line needs to incorporate that flare in order to maximize our tree's inclination and our tree's best possible grip with the ground, okay? Now let's talk about, before we go back to the other one, and I'm going to rotate back to the big camera, okay? Let's talk about what would happen if we did not have this necessary limitation in the base and we chose to go with this movement to the left, okay? We've got this very big structural branch here, and if we chose to move the tree to the left, this branch would probably drop down, create that longest point, and create our defining branch, right? Let me go to the back here. Create our defining branch, or the branch that works with the trunk to generate the longest point of asymmetry and build the movement in the design, okay? Now, if we went with this branch moving to the left, trunk moving to the left, defining branch moving to the left, that would also influence our decision to move this apical region that we've cut back to the left as well. All three of those primary elements of design, defining branch, trunk, and apex, moving in one direction, is the most fundamental design in bonsai, okay? But again, coming back to the detail cam, we see that we're creating an actual flaw by angling the tree to the left. So let's see what happens when we change it to the right. Okay. Let's go to the right now. Okay, and I'm going to give it a fairly stout angle because I want to see what we can generate here in terms of energy and in terms of interest. Okay? So now when I shift this, this is one of the most interesting things about exploring design, and this is where I say we get to play. Now by changing this direction here, we see these changes in direction in the trunk. We see that visual mass thrown off to the right that we get to respond to. This big structural piece that would have been forming our movement had we moved to the left is probably going to be eliminated because it's at a junction or a whorl with this big branch in the back. So if we cut this off and we're moving to the right, we can now bring this forward and create that defining branch out of this very strong piece of growth to now define our movement to the right. Okay, now I'm going to rotate this to the detail cam. I'm going to pull this big branch out of the way so you guys can see. Notice how the base flares to the left here, and that sort of buttress that forms with that flare is gripping the ground and supporting that movement to the right. This is when we start getting into really good, solid, sustainable design and design decisions that are based on the material. We've got a base flaring to the left. We've got a trunk moving to the right. This flare to the left is holding the tree as that visual mass moves to the right. This allows us now to carry this branch out to the right. And then again, if we're looking from the big cam, once this branch is out to the right, this apex moves out to the right. And now we've got all of the justification educated by the piece of material to make these structural moves and set the tone for our design. So now that we've found that angle, that direction, we know where our defining branch is coming from, we know what direction our apex is going to go, we're going to eliminate a few structural components that we've identified as unnecessary, okay? So first things first, when we're looking at this whorl, where we have these two very big dominant branches, we said because we're moving to the right now with our design, this is going to be the branch that gives us the definition of our movement. This was the piece that was counter to that. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to swing back so you guys have a visual reference of where we're at, okay? We're moving that way. This is our branch. This piece comes off, okay? Now we have another whorl inside of this situation that exists, and that is these two growing at the exact same elevation, okay? And let me rotate so that we can see on the detail cam. Okay, notice these two very, very close in proximity, all right? Now, if I'm going to be moving this bigger branch over here to be my branch that defines the movement to the right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove this one, and this is going to counter that really big, strong movement of that defining branch. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove this, okay? And now, if we just take one rotation around the tree, we'll see we have a really beautiful alternating branch structure where we lack, or in no one area are there two branches growing from the same internode or the same whorl that could potentially be giving us or causing inverse taper as they thicken and swell, okay? So this is a really great structure that we've created here to be building a really wonderful bonsai on, all right? Now, next step before I can go about wiring, and this is where the preparation process and using the tree to generate all these things, we tend to get over anxious or overzealous about the work. We do have to come in here in the upper portion of the tree, and because this is a younger portion of the tree, there's needles that are growing all the way on to the actual physical trunk itself. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to clean these needles off so that I'm not crushing them or crossing over them with my wire. That would be poor form in terms of craftsmanship of bonsai, to crush needles or wire over the top of them. We should be cleaning those out. Okay, and then I'm also going to be coming in here, and much like I did with the trunk itself, if I have really good, solid, strong, healthy branches, I'm going to be taking off some of these weaker pieces, any dead pieces, and any pieces that are proportionally too small to contribute to the quality of the overall design. Okay, so I'm going to be cleaning this out. This makes space for wire. This opens it up so that we can see the line. And this is a decision-making process that allows us to more accurately design the tree. Okay? Now I'm going to be getting to these locations just like I did in the lower part, where I'm going to have several branches originating from one junction or one whorl. And I'm not going to be necessarily making this decision in terms of what ones I'm going to be keeping quite yet. I want to leave myself as many options as I can so that when I put the structural wire on this and I create the movement in this to continue the trunk line with the chosen front and the chosen angle, that I give myself every opportunity possible to be able to use the branches once it's been placed to create the design. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave that for now, knowing I'm going to come back after I've created that movement and developed a further concept for design and make some decisions. Okay, so I'm just going to clean this up to the top, taking off some of those weaker pieces. I'm going to take off a few more weaker pieces, a few more of these. Okay, and now that feels pretty good, just in terms of being able to get wire in between these branches and on the trunk in a way that's going to allow me to position that and have the highest quality product. Okay, so I'm going to break into my structural wire. Now, when we talk about structural wire, we're talking about gauges of wire that are allowing us to position all of these really thick pieces, adjust the central trunk line, or give the structural branches that are originating from the trunk, these big, thicker primary branches that connect to the trunk and originate from the trunk. Structural wire is what we use to give these shape and direction. Okay, now when we're starting to look at the amount of wire that we need to be wiring these, we generally want to give ourselves some excess wire. Not only do we want excess because as we're applying it, we want to have the ability to thoroughly wire the entire length of the branch. We also need some excess because we need the ability to utilize the wire for leverage, to apply it in a clean way that's also gentle to the tree, okay? So when I'm applying structural wire, my biggest focus is entering the shoulder of the branch or the collar where these pieces of ramification originate from the trunk, because this location where this branch originates from the trunk is the point that the wire has the most function when it contacts that point. And this is because we've got a totally mobile system. This is mobile, this is movable. This point where it joins the trunk is immobile, and it's from that point that our function and the holding power of the wire exists. Now, you'll see this work, so let's not dig too far into that until we've actually seen it applied, okay? Okay, here we go. All right, so I got to get into that shoulder. I'm going to support that contact with that shoulder with this hand. And this is an important part. How do we start? First, we want to create that nice smooth arc so that we've got a very, very clean line. Now, notice that this branch below it is rotating in this counterclockwise direction. This too is rotating in counterclockwise direction. This keeps a very clean aesthetic in our tree, right? And we should always be thinking about function and aesthetics. I want to have that synonymous or that continuity of the same direction of rotation. Okay, so I'm going to get this one set up, and I'm going to hold that there, and then I'm going to come back to this one, right? And I'm going to make sure that this also has really good contact with the shoulder of that branch, okay? And then I can come back, and I can always tighten this one just to reaffirm that contact and make sure that that wire is super clean and functional in terms of having beautiful contact with the same continuity of the angle of turns on all of my wraps of copper wire, okay? And this is how we make the wire disappear visually in terms of the overall composition. If we have the same angle, the same spacing, and we avoid the gaps in the wire, we're going to create the least visible application, and you're going to see the tree as the most primary component of the visual creation, right? And so if the wire is all ugly, if it's hanging off of the tree, if the angles are screwed up, if the spacing between the angles is screwed up, you're going to be looking at the wire, not at the tree, right? And we want the tree to be the focus of our efforts. So it's important that we handle this and approach this from just a very fundamental concept of aesthetics, all right? So now, I'm going to be supporting, with each turn that I make, notice this hand, I'm going to be supporting the application of the wire by maintaining the wire's position and the contact of that wire with the branch. And this is important because as we bend the wire, and let me get this up here so you can see my application hand, as we're bending this wire, the wire has now been work hardened by applying it and creating this bend. If we're overly working it, it's actually moving all the way back here. So by holding and supporting here, It gives me the ability to work my way between these smaller branches, and I'm maintaining that contact and I'm stopping that movement from occurring, which is giving my wire that quality of contact and that continuity of angle and spacing in order to enable that beautiful, clean aesthetic. So our focus is on the tree. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and carry this thicker wire out to the bigger of my two pieces here. Now notice I'm just going to show the detail cam. Notice how I have a smaller branch here and a bigger branch here. Whenever I'm carrying the structural wire out, I generally want to carry the thick structural wire out to the thicker of the branches that are being wired. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to carry this underneath that thinner branch, and I'm going to maintain that same direction of turn, but I'm going to carry it out onto this thicker of the two branches. And this is going to be that point that's going to give me the length to define that movement in my design. And if I have any needles or anything, I want to clean these out as I'm wiring so that I don't wire over the top of them. Otherwise, we'll crush them and they'll look horrifically ugly. And again, we want to show the finest level of craftsmanship that we can while we're pursuing this creation of this tree. So anything like that, small little instances where we can create a higher quality product, we want to take advantage of those. Okay? Okay. All right, so let's come back to our front here. Okay, I'm going to hop all the way back here. Let's take a look now. Okay, here's our front. Here's our buttress of our trunk. Here's our angle now. And we're saying that this big structural piece back here is going to come down this way and create that length. Okay? We're going to say this apex here is going to work up and to the right to work with that and work with the angle of the trunk. I'm going to rotate this back to the detail cam so you guys can watch my hands as I bend and place this structural piece and branches. So as I'm working here now, I'm going to be supporting this branch in a multitude of locations to be able to bend effectively, right? So notice how my ring finger and pinky finger are going to be gripping this branch, but my index and middle finger are going to be right here. If I just pulled from here, what's going to happen at this crotch where this branch divides is I'm going to split that branch right down the middle. It's going to tear at that point of weakness because where those join, that's a very weak junction, okay? So I'm going to apply pressure here, I'm going to apply pressure here, and I'm going to bring this hand back and I'm going to hold the wire here, okay? So as I do that, I'm pushing in with my thumb on the interior portion of that wire, and you can see I'm moving the branch all the way from the base of its point of origin here, okay? Now when we're creating an aesthetic or a tree that has a downward angle, typically we're referencing snow load or an alpine tree or an alpine shape in the design. We don't need to necessarily worry about that right now, but this defining branch, the angle that we drop this down is going to set the tone for how each of these branches above it is going to follow that same angle of decline. So we want to make sure to get this position exactly as we want it. Okay, and I'm going to go way down with this. Now when we go down, trees naturally grow towards the light. We want to come back up, and so I'm going to use this last turn of my thick wire, and I'm just going to go back up towards the sunlight. Down, tip back up. Not up super dramatically, but just a light raise to get that pad flat so those tips can grow towards the light. And now we've given that a really beautiful position in terms of the rest of the tree's shape. Okay, take a look at that. Notice that downward angle and then up right at the tip there. Okay. So now that we have that headed to the right, trunk to the right, base off to the left, supporting all of this, I want to create some interesting movement in this piece, and I want to bring this apex and the upper portion of the tree towards the front of the tree. Now I'm going to rotate this to the side so that you guys can see. From the side, you'll notice that this is actually facing to the back of the tree. We generally always want that apex to face forward, so it looks as if we're inviting the viewer to come in and look at our tree, which means that my first move, again, supporting the wire with my offhand, holding this branch in a multitude of locations and applying the force right to that wire as it's applied to the branch, I'm going to bring that towards the front and I'm going to twist that so that I'm shifting the position of that branch off to the right where we said we wanted it to be to work with this branch and the angle of the trunk. Let's take a look at that. So now you can see we've got the base, buttressing to the left, okay? We've got the trunk moving up to the right. We've got the branch that's defining the movement moving to the right. And now we've got that apex coming towards us and also moving to the right. Now we're going to create a few more changes of direction and a little bit more interest in that line. But this gets us headed in the right direction to be able to start building on and creating that fundamental bonsai shape. Okay, and I'm going to add a little bit of movement just to generate some interest in this. Because the more changes of direction, as we know from what we selected in the trunk line, the higher the quality of the tree is going to be. Let's see if we can't add a few pieces of movement in here. And don't be afraid, right? This is where playing with a tree that gives you the opportunity to explore based on the fact that it wasn't super expensive. This is how we learn. This is how we get involved in design. It's how we grow, how we start to understand. You guys have to do it. You've got to touch it. You've got to feel it. You've got to try it. You've got to practice it. And this is really where it starts to get fun, okay? So this angle that I've set this branch at here, I'm also going to be following this angle with all of my countering branches so that they all have this same angle of drop. Now, obviously, if this is the length and that's defining my movement, some of my decisions on this side are going to be to shorten these branches. Okay, so I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to do so by taking out just some very obvious big, thick sections. So if I want to shorten this, I have this very big, long, thick central piece here, and I've got these two finer pieces here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take that big, thick piece out. Okay, same thing that's going to happen here at this fork. I've got this big, thick piece. I've got this central spine. I've got these finer pieces. I'm going to take that out. Okay, and already I've started to shorten that. Now I can carry this even further. Notice how I have a really fine branch here and a really fine branch here, and I've got this central stem here. If I want it to be shorter, I can carry that there. And now all of a sudden, I start to see that length moving in that direction. Okay, let's take a look. Aha, aha, okay. Now, maybe we can spice this up just a little bit more, okay? So on the detail cam, you guys can see that there's very little movement in this piece here. Now, the trunk of this tree doesn't have a tremendous amount of movement. It's very soft, and we want to respect that soft movement, okay? But we also want to add as much visual interest as we can to these branches. So let's see if we can put a little bit more of a wiggle and a few different unpredictable turns in this to get it to have a little bit more visual interest, okay? So I'm going to come, as I go down from the shoulder, I'm going to come up here, then I'm going to come back down again. Okay, one last turn on this bad boy to get that wire again back underneath that tip so that we have control. Okay, and I'm going to bring this up just to give it just a nice little wiggle through there, okay? Now we're starting to create some interest. Now we're starting to generate some direction. Now we're starting to create that movement to the right and that flow, okay? Okay, so now that we've set that really primary structure, we've redefined that apical line, we've brought it towards the front, we've carried it to the right, we've set the angle of the tree, obviously we've set that defining branch that moves to the right. I'm going to go through and I'm going to do some of the branch selection process throughout the upper canopy of the tree so that I can come back in, I can wire out all of that remaining structure that gives counterbalance to that movement, and I can start to create this bonsai tree. Now, my focus is going to be on each of those whorls where I've got 3 or 4 branches originating from one location on that trunk. Okay? I'm going to take that down to one branch and the continuation of the trunk as my reference for reduction of the branching, right? And there is no right answer for this process. This is where you guys get to have fun, okay? Now, the stronger that this base is to the side opposite of the lean, and in this case on the left side, the fewer the branches I need on this left side of the tree to counter that visual movement to the right, right? Because the base is taking care of that. Now, the weaker that base is, maybe the less of an angle we have, and maybe the more branches we have on the left side of the tree to be able to counter that visual weight so we still achieve some form of visual stability, where when we look at it, the tree doesn't feel like it's falling over, right? It feels like, this is moving this way, but this branch is here holding that position, okay? And these are the things that we're considering when we start the selection process. Which branch do I keep in this junction? Which branch do we need to hold it? Or which one can we remove to continue to add to that if we've got the base to support that design, right? And this is where you guys get to play, okay? So I would encourage you, explore. Don't be afraid to remove branches. Don't be afraid to keep branches. Don't be afraid to wire branches and come back later and say, you know, that's not really the best, that wasn't the best choice, but you can always come back in and make those decisions. At the same time, take some out, open up that negative space, experience what it's like to explore laying out this design. When you guys start designing in this way and playing like this, you're gonna learn so much about bonsai. And this is a nursery stock piece of material. It's a run-of-the-mill Christmas tree. This is something that's okay to play on. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to learn. This is how we grow as bonsai practitioners, right? And I will also say this, to make this a good bonsai, if we follow the process, very, very possible. And also, making this a good bonsai, we're gonna make a better one each time we do one more tree, right? Okay, so we're gonna go through, we're gonna do sort of the big prune. I'm gonna play a little bit, have some fun here, and when we get to the top, we're gonna come back and then we're gonna design this thing out and see how all of these decisions pan out for us, okay? I'm gonna walk you through a few of the pruning decisions as I go. You guys can utilize this or discard of it as you will. Okay, when I'm working on these now, this is a counter branch. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna further reduce. Now, I'd cut this piece back to here. I have a very fine piece of ramification here and a finer branch here. I'm gonna shorten this, and I'm gonna take this big, thick guy out so that I further reduce the length of this branch, because I want this to be short. It allows me to push the movement to the right side, okay? This piece on the back being so low and also being super thin, I don't necessarily want a thin branch to have a bigger pad than a thicker branch. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna take this guy back as well, just kind of reducing some of that overall foliar mass. Nice small pad on the back of the tree. Gives us depth in the design to keep these in the back, but also we don't want them to be gigantic compared to the branches that are giving us the movement off of the sides. Okay, in here, now I know with this big long branch, I can create a few different levels of foliage, or I can divide one branch into a pad, and give that one branch a lot more interest. This is the branch that's defining the movement in the tree, so creating interest in this sounds like a really good idea. Still gonna remove overly weak pieces. I'm still gonna come to these inner nodes where I've got multiple branches coming out of one junction in the trunk, okay, and I'm gonna pick my very best one, which is either the branch that has the most compact growth, the strongest growth, or the ability to become a really strong branch based on the amount of foliage that it has. So if we see here, we notice how long and slender this is to get out to here. I'm gonna take that off, okay, and if I'm gonna keep the one opposite of it, which is here, much more compact, I'm gonna take this other one off in that same vicinity. Okay, these guys here feel like I could wire them to help me create a pad there. These two pieces feel rather nice and established, so I'm gonna get rid of that. Now I've got a pad here, I've got a pad here, and then moving down into this area, I've got to decide how long do I want this branch to be to define that movement. So I'm gonna rotate this to the front again, okay? I'm gonna come take a look at it with you guys. And when I'm looking at this now, for the size of this tree, I don't want this to be super duper long. It's proportionally no longer, as it stands now, no longer appropriate to have it that length. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna shorten it one inner node, give ourselves a little bit more of a realistic length, boom, okay? I'm gonna pull this back to the detail cam so you can see what that did for us. So by taking off that big strong guy, we have 1, 2, 3 more branches originating from that location. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna take off this bottom one as well. And I'm gonna keep these 2 laterals to form my tip. This feels like a really good length for this tree. Okay, and now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna create a staggering branch design as I work my way back. So I've got my 2 at the tip. If I take off this piece here, I'm gonna take off this piece back at this junction, and now my branches go from here to here, from the right to the left, to the right, to the left, to the 2 branches at the tip, and I've got a really beautiful structure created to be able to build a nice fan-shaped pad, okay? Whew. Yes, and magically, all of a sudden this tree is just coming to life, okay? So now I've got this big, strong piece kind of in the upper canopy. Obviously, I don't want this overwhelming my lower branch, and let me show you what that looks like, okay? So now from the front, here's my lower defining branch. Here's this big, strong branch right here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shorten that so it's proportional, meaning proportionally shorter than this defining branch below it. Again, when I come in here tight, I've got this junction here where I've got my 2 and this central stem with this big long internode. I'm going to take that out. Boom. Okay, and we can already see how that starts to reduce that. Now I'm going to come into each of these as well, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shorten this. I'm actually going to go all the way. I'm going to shorten it to there. Okay, and then this one, I'm going to leave a little bit more length on this, so this is slightly long. That keeps that nice and proportional. Now we see this branch running out there. We see our defining branch carrying most of the length. We see our counterbalance branch here and here being much shorter to push that movement out to the right. It's coming together. Okay, so now over here I've got another really beautiful branch. This one's probably going to come around to the back to give us a little bit more depth in our design. All right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take at this junction, actually, let's take a real close look at this. I've got a branch here, I've got a branch here that breaks into a pair, and I've got a branch here. Nowhere in this do I have any pairs of 3s originating or any whorls originating from one junction. I can keep that. But as I come out here now, I've got 1, 2, 3 pairs here, or excuse me, 3 pairs. I've got a trio here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take out the longest and the least acceptable in terms of overly long, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shorten that tip just to compress that a little bit. That pulls that branch back into proportion, okay? Now I'm up in the apical region of the tree, or starting to get up into the upper portion of the trunk anyways, and I know this branch is going to have to lay over like this, and this is really the big counterbalance branch to this piece here. Let me show you guys what that looks like, okay? I'm rolling out here with this length. I might be blocking you with my black jacket. Rolling out here with this length, this piece is going to counter that motion here, okay? So I want to leave some length on this. I'm going to leave all of the length that's on this already to make sure I've got enough, and when I wire it out and place it, I'm going to see and make sure that it works with the length of that branch over there, okay? Now up in the apex of the tree, we'll drop this branch down. I probably don't want this being as long as it's going to be. I'm going to go ahead and shorten that to make that apex as small as we possibly can. Okay, this branch is going to come back to the back, and I've got a really wonderful little tight apex up here to create that nice little crown for the top of my tree. And we've just gone through and selected all of the branches that we need to make this the very best fundamental bonsai it possibly can be, okay? I want to remind you guys, this is a $20 piece of nursery stock, a leftover Christmas tree. Look at what we can do. It's amazing. Okay, so we've got all of the pieces in place to be able to take this and now officially sit down, wire it out, and see what we can finally accomplish in terms of a final product. I can't wait. This is the payoff for the work. This is the payoff for the dedication. This is the payoff for the creativity to see the final product come to fruition. This is when you guys also get to dig in and have a lot of fun creating those pads and bringing out that final style that really makes this tree something special. We're going to time lapse through this so that you guys don't have to watch the application of each individual piece of wire. And let's see where this comes. We'll touch base with you when we're finished, and enjoy the process. So just coming in close to look at some of the independent branch styling, right? There's a few things that govern the way that I'm styling these branches. Every time I have a smaller branch originating from this larger branch, my first movement when I'm styling is always into the main branch and then out to create this acute angle. You'll see this acute angle. You'll notice there's an acute angle here, an acute angle here. This allows us to establish that in-out movement that creates this fan shape, okay? And the next point that I want you guys to really grab onto and take with you when you start creating branches and designing your bonsai is to always create a flat bottom to your pad so that you create in that flat bottom the definition from foliage mass to foliage mass, or definition from this branch to this branch, that you can clearly see these are separate pieces of foliage and separate pads or masses of foliage. This negative space, obviously very important, but the organization of those pads is what allows you to achieve that definition, right? If you follow just those two fundamental things, creating an acute angle with the smaller branches towards that more significant branch, and creating that flat bottom to your pads, you're already on your way to being able to design a really solid bonsai with really good branching. Okay guys, so post-wiring, secondary, tertiary's dialed in, and I just wanted to come back to the shape and see what we've created and kind of go over it with you. Very, very, again, fundamental form of a bonsai, really nice. I'm very, very satisfied with the product. And you know, this is a challenge, again, that I've seen year in, year out as an opportunity to go take a very, you know, what is a very widely available plain piece of nursery stock in the form of a living Christmas tree, a noble fir here that we used, and see what we could do with it by looking just objectively at its characteristics at the nursery, coming through, finding the best front, choosing the best angle and interest in the tree, defining that branch, creating that apex, and then using the other branches to counterbalance the design. So let's just go through this a little bit so that we can be sure we're on the same page. So we've got the base flaring to the left, which is what's supporting the design moving to the right. We've got our place where we've got the most changes of direction and the best base chosen as the front, right? Because of the information of that base, we've carried that defining branch to the right, which gives us the longest point. And that branch that we had reduced the trunk down to as the better transition of taper from the base, as well as the best structural piece, we've added the movement and carried it to the right as well to work with that branch shifting to the right. So we have this movement to the right with this base on the left anchoring it, and we've created a very fundamental distribution of branches. Okay, a few things to pick up. This piece right here being super long, to some degree counters this length in the future. As this gets healthier and these interior pieces get stronger, we'll probably be reducing that so that we further push the design to the right because the base adds that degree of stability. And as you guys see through the trees, through the tree and through the branches, these pieces in the back are very, very important because they stop your eye, they hold your eye in the design and in the line of the trunk, okay? Now up at the apex, I originally had this branch, and I'm gonna move this for you. I originally had this branch over here, okay? Now when we put it over there, it's an interesting aesthetic, but all of a sudden we start to get a ton of branches over on this left side of the tree, and we create this big hole. This branch in the back can't come over and fill it. This branch up top can't drop down and fill it because they don't have enough length and they don't have the position on the trunk to be moved there in a structurally sound way. But this one could, and so I shifted this over into this negative space so that your eye is still held in the design and it allows you to work your way through all the way up to the apex without stopping at that point where we have a ton of foliage on one side and no foliage on the other. And this is what we're talking about when we start talking about visual balance, right? The visual balance of the foliage mass here versus here, the visual balance of the trunk leaning to the right but the base anchoring to the left, the visual balance of having a very consistent distribution of negative space and positive space or foliar mass as we work our way up the trunk. All in all, we've created a wonderful structure for a great fundamental bonsai to start from this point, continue to evolve, and only get better. So I'm going to say our experiment to see if we could take a random, readily available Christmas tree and make it a solid, fundamental bonsai for that everybody has access to and everybody can start to dive into and play and explore and create. I'm going to say it went pretty well. I feel really good about this, and it's nice to have that question answered, at least in my mind, that there is something to be taken out of every single tree that we can maximize and make a wonderful bonsai out of. I hope you guys have gotten a lot of good information that not only will help beginners start to dig into the process of bonsai creation and remove some of the fear and give you guys some guiding points, but I also hope that this was effective for people that are experienced at bonsai, creating a little bit of a challenge to challenge yourself with what kind of material can you utilize and how do you best utilize it to make bonsai. This is how we continue to grow. This is how we continue to design. This is how we continue to understand building our skills towards becoming better bonsai practitioners. Hope you guys have had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful end of the year. Wish you all the best in 2018. And Bonsai Mirai and the Mirai Live crew, we're going to be right there with you, bringing you all kinds of really intense knowledge, working hard to continue to elevate our bonsai skills. Thank you guys very much. Happy New Year to you, and we'll see you in the new year.